and welcome back to Season 2 of SciBurst, a podcast about science, popular culture and entertainment. We're your hosts, Isabel
and Ella. We are two science communicators and sci-fi nerds steering this spaceship, alongside guests, into the multiverse of science fun. Today's episode, Balloons and Science Shows, communicating science for children, finding your niche, engaging a young audience, and being a business boss.
Yeah, and this episode is going to be structured a bit differently because today we have a special guest, Chloe. Chloe, do you want to say hi?
Hi everyone, how you doing?
Woohoo! Before we dive into the topic today and all the cool things that Chloe gets up to, it's really important that we acknowledge that this episode of SciBurst is being recorded on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. Daura Nuna, Daura Ngunnawal. Yangu Nalamanyen Dunimanyen. Ngunnawal Wari, Dawa Wari, Dindi, Wangirilijin Yin. This is Ngunnawal country. Today we are all meeting together on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders. And we extend that respect to elders of all the country, of all the land that you are listening to this podcast on today. So with that, today we are talking about a very, very fun topic in the world of entertainment and education, and that is science communication for children. Though a lot of science centres and science are kind of aimed at family fun, we are very excited to have Dr. Chloe Lim here to talk about what it's like to communicate a complex, abstract topic such as DNA specifically for children as the primary audience. Engaging a young audience in STEM is critical for STEM pipelines, encouraging an ongoing relationship between people in STEM throughout their developmental and education journeys. Some of the really other interesting things we'll touch on during this episode include being a science mentor, running a STEM and storytelling business, the importance of culturally and linguistically diverse voices in STEM. So with that teaser, I'm going to pass on to Isabel to introduce Dr. Chloe Lim properly to all of you.
Yeah, thanks, Ella. So I'm going to introduce our incredible guest, Dr. Chloe Lim. Chloe is a molecular biologist, balloon artist, science storyteller, coach, mentor, and regulatory scientist. And some listeners might actually be familiar with Chloe because she became the face of Science Week in the ACT this year. So Chloe is a seasoned professional with a unique blend of expertise in science, business, leadership, and creativity. She has a PhD in medical science, over 14 years of experience in epigenetics research, and was the winner of the 2023 Canberra Micro Businesswoman of the Year award. She was also a finalist on Channel 7's reality show Blow Up, so cool, where she showcased her balloon artistry skill, and she also hosts the Cold Voices in STEM podcast, amplifying the stories of women in STEM who are culturally and linguistically diverse. And my favorite part of Chloe's bio is that she has a science education business, Twisty Fic, where she merges her love for science and balloon twisting to create interactive shows and workshops for children that make learning a blast. Chloe, welcome to SciBurst, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be fun, and I'm really excited to share more about my story as well with everyone.
Yeah, and I think to kick us off, it'd be lovely to hear more about your STEM journey. So you started out in academia, but later transitioned into government and also science shows and science communication for kids. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit how you ended up in this space?
It's a long story because I am pretty old by now, but but I mean how it all began. I do have that deep interest for science from a very young age, and I just gravitated towards science subjects when I was young. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in Malaysia, and when I was doing my high school, I did biology, I did physics, I did chemistry. And then when I did my A-levels, I went for physics, chemistry, and double maths. I just loved maths. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because one of my dreams when I was young was I wanted to study overseas. We had this dream, I had this dream of studying overseas, and I had to really study really hard to get scholarships so that I can go overseas because my family wouldn't have been able to afford sending me overseas. And so, I worked really hard and got a scholarship to study in New Zealand. So I did my Bachelor of Biomedical Science in New Zealand. But then at the end of my second and third year, I had the opportunity to come to ANU, actually, to do summer research projects. And that was when I really got hooked into research and really got interested in how we can study things at such a molecular level, which I thought was really interesting. And and then from there, I stayed on and did an honours in medical science at the ANU. And unfortunately, I couldn't stay on in Canberra or stay on in Australia after my honours, and I had to go back to Malaysia. But I found a job in Singapore. So I lived in Singapore for a few months and worked as a research assistant, looking at the mouse brain. And
cool.
looking at mouse brains, and specifically actually looking at to see how we can help get rid of tumours in mouse brains, which can then hopefully apply to human cancer patients as well. But I did get my PhD scholarship to come back to ANU, and so I left Singapore and then came back to Canberra and did my PhD in medical science. So I was studying epigenetics in the immune system for my PhD, looking at the environment of the DNA to see how that can impact whether a gene is switched on or switched off.
Right.
Yeah, and from there, I did a postdoc as well. So did a postdoc at ANU, but then the boss decided to close the lab, so I have to move somewhere else. So then I moved to University of Canberra and did my postdoc there.
Mm-hmm.
And but then by that stage, I was at a point where I was thinking of starting a family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I did take a couple of maternity leaves off, and came back to work part-time as well. And then I had some challenges, I guess, working in that environment. And I decided that, maybe it's kind of time to, change my environment. And so I was thinking of moving into government. So I actually tried for years trying to get into government. And it was actually quite tricky for me to move into government, I have to say. But amidst all of that, how I got into the science and balloon side of things was after my maternity leave ended with my twin girls, I was told that my work hours were reduced because of cuts to grant funding.
Right.
Yeah, so research funding issues. And I thought, I had a lot of fun doing balloons, and I thought maybe I can do something with this. And so that's how I started the balloon business. And at the same time, in that same year, a lot happened in the year 2019, I have to say.
Yes, COVID year.
I started balloon business, and then I also wrote a book, a children's book called What Makes You Unique, introducing DNA to children. And then I also moved into government that year as well. So it seems like
huge, yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge year, I have to say. So that's how I got into government. Actually, before that, and I think part of the reason that helped me to move into government was I actually did some clinical trial work with a biotech company before that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that gave me a lot of clinical trial experience, and they were looking for someone who were able to evaluate clinical trials. So I think that gave me the leg up to then move into government. So, and from there, I guess I'm now a regulatory scientist who is also a balloon artist and twists balloons at weekends and performs science shows for children.
Yeah.
Wow, there's nothing Chloe can't do.
I know, right? I mean, everyone just heard her bio too, which is a long list of amazing achievements, to be honest. Yeah, and so with your balloon shows, balloons are such a unique way of communicating science concepts and science concepts to children as well. Do you have any reason why you picked balloons, and also what role do they play in your form of science storytelling?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the idea of the science show didn't actually come up to the forefront straight away. So I really started off with, making balloons, having fun making balloons, and, just noticing how much children enjoy balloons and love balloons. And so I think that's part of the engagement factor is, kids just love balloons. And what better way to get their attention than with, fun and colorful balloons, right? Yeah. And so, but the story of how the science show come about actually came along a little bit later when I started to learn more about performing and entertaining with balloons for children. So as part of my balloon offering, I also do balloon storytelling shows. Yeah. And so I was learning how to, use balloons as costumes for children to put on a show as a way to, entertain the children at a party. But then I was thinking, actually, maybe I can use balloons in a show as well, but for science. Yeah. And so that's sort of how it got into play, where I was thinking, okay, so I've got this book and I have this story here. how can I make it more engaging? And so that's where the balloons come in. And then I was thinking, okay, so I can put balloons into this show, but what can I make out of balloons that can engage the children and yet teach them at the same time? Yeah, because it's not just a matter of making balloons for the sake of balloons. There's firstly the aspect of, getting their attention, of course. Kids have pretty short attention spans in general. and so we need something to grab their attention. And then secondly, the educational aspect, like what can we create to make it interesting for them and also for them to learn. So, DNA is a great one because we know the structure of the DNA. It's the beautiful double helix structure that everyone knows. And so as part of my show, I try to create things that is scientific, but with balloons. So, you have got the DNA helix structure, and part of my show, I also talk about chromatin as well. So essentially the beads on a string, and to teach them how DNA is wrapped up into a tiny cell. So those are a couple of things that I do use. And the other thing I like to show the kids as well is a microscope. So I make a balloon microscope because I'm trying to emphasize the idea of, cells are really tiny. We can't see it with our eyes or with a magnifying glass, really. But we need a special equipment in order to see the cells. So having the balloons as a tool of engagement really is a great way to bring them in and keep their attention, and then add that novelty. I think kids really like something that's novel, and anything that's novel usually taps into the curiosity. They want to learn more about what is this about.
Yeah, I really like that explanation for a few reasons. And I totally see the novelty. I think maybe balloons are so exciting for children because it's something that's not part of their everyday life. And, the colors and the excitement and the fact that it's being created in front of them and they can see it going from deflated to inflated and then looking completely different with just a few movements.
Yeah.
But my favorite other part of what you just said is how you make the microscope to kind of continually inform the children that DNA is so tiny that we need this specialized equipment to see it. And I think one of the amazing things about what you do in creating the double helix DNA structure out of balloons is that you give children a three-dimensional, big, symbol, metaphor, but like a physical version that they can actually see and interact with that is going to be, I think, a lot more powerful than an illustration in a book or someone telling them just through verbal storytelling, as they have this gigantic physical thing in front of them that looks unreal, and then you tell them it's inside your cells and we need this specialized equipment to look at it. I think there's something really special, unique, and really, really clever about the way that you show them such a tiny molecular level part of human bodies on such an understandable scale. I think that's so amazing.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, they just love it, I think. Because the other thing that is important is I think a lot of us are actually very visual learners as well.
Yeah.
Like we would remember pictures better than we would remember words. And so this is a great way to sort of help children remember these things as well. So, and they can associate, I guess, all the different concepts that they would learn with that picture that they would have seen. Yeah.
And I think what you were saying too about it being, balloons being novel is really important as well, because balloons for kids are associated with exciting things like birthdays and parties. And then to have that in a science show is helping them to have those feelings also for science. So
yes, I love that. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because you want to make learning science fun as well, right? And I think children are so geared towards play-based learning that you do have to add that element of play when you're trying to teach children so that they can learn it well and retain what they learn as well.
Yeah, actually, that brings us on to the next question really nicely, which is talking about engaging children in science. It can be really challenging, and particularly as neuroscience and cognitive development as a part of psychology tells us that abstraction and abstract thinking is a part of development that comes with age. So there's potentially an age barrier to the types of things children can understand. Just to go into a little bit, I guess, of developmental theory from Piaget. So he was kind of like a very fundamental person in psychology who set up these development theories that basically says that children think differently to adults because they're learning, like their brains are still developing, and they've kind of got a few stage gates that happen with time. And again, his work is very foundational, and there's some newer science that has found that it's not quite as cut and dry as he may have suggested. But it kind of goes that from birth to 2 years old, children are really learning about the world through their movement and their senses and what they experience. They're not so good with object permanence, so if they can't see an object, it kind of doesn't exist.
Yes.
And then they get into kind of like a pre-operational stage from ages 2 to 7 where they're very egocentric. Their whole worldview is, this is what I experience, which makes a lot of sense because to them that is their understanding of the world so far. But this is when they can start to do symbolic thinking. So they can see a flower and draw a flower and know that their drawing represents the flower they've just seen. And then they get, from ages 7 to 11, it's suggested that's the start of their logical reasoning stage. They understand concepts such as conservation, which is that the same mass of liquid can look different in different jars.
Oh.
And then from 12 and up, this is the formal operational stage, which is where they can do abstract thinking. So this is for things like DNA, which they cannot see, but they can understand through perhaps a balloon sculpture that this is part of their cells and part of their body. So it's suggested through psychology they don't have the foundational tools to understand abstract reasoning until age 12, but your balloon shows are for a whole range of children and ages. What is it like delivering science communication to children when they've all got a really wide variety of ways they can understand? And do you think they can actually understand more complex ideas than most people think?
Yeah, that's a very good question. See, for me, like in any communication, in any types of communication, really, the main thing that we need to focus on is the audience. Yeah, and to think about, what the audience background is, what their knowledge is at that point in time as well. And I take that same approach with my science shows as well, to think about, okay, I've got a 4 to 8-year-old group of children, what would they be thinking about? What is it that they know? Because I think one of the things that you have mentioned before as well is that to help the children to learn, you need to understand what is it that they know already. And then to relate what you want to teach them to what they already know. So it's kind of like understanding, the knowledge base and then bridging that gap with what you want to present. And in order to present in a way that can help them, you're going to have to use metaphors or analogies or even stories as well. So, we talk about DNA, it is a very abstract concept, right? And I mean, I actually, even in my shows, I actually tell them the full name of DNA as well.
Wow.
Yeah, because I think it's important for them to realize that, you've got this amazing thing in your body and you can't see it. Obviously you cannot see it, but there is something that's in your body that relates to what you can see. For example, your hair color, your skin color, your eye color. And all of those things is due to something in your body that's called DNA. And I think it is possible for children to understand, slightly more complicated topics like this or, ideas and concepts. It's just how you present it. Now, they may not necessarily remember it, in a, how do you say, what was I going to say? I was going to say how they may not necessarily remember the full name of DNA or something like that, but they would at least, I think, somehow have that understanding that, oh, I've got this DNA and that's why, I've got, black hair or blue eyes, and that's because I've got them from my mom and dad. So even just basic concepts like that, I think is an important thing to convey to the children, because the other story that I try to put into my show is also to understand and appreciate cultural diversity. Because everyone looks different from everyone. We're all very unique in our own ways as well. So I think it depends on, I guess, when you're creating that show, what are the key messages that you want to bring to the children? What are the key things that you want them to take away from? And then from there, then you can think of how then can I present this in a way that they will understand?
Yeah. Do you go into shows and you're with, I guess, a motivation that is if they learn one new thing about themselves or how their body works today, then I will have done a good job. Do you have like one motivating goal or factor kind of like that?
Yeah, I think people want to impact people in such a big way, right? I'm a huge believer in, impacting one person at a time as well. So even if it's just one person who really gets it, I think, my work is done in a way. but I mean, I actually get more than that through my shows, which I find really, really fulfilling. So an example that I can give you is I did my science show at a school, and I had a question at the end of my show during Q&A time from a student who, asked about how, why is my brother, why is my brother sick? But then we don't know that he is sick until it's really, really late. And it really sparks this sort of conversations as well, and sort of deeper understanding, or how it relates back to them, because obviously that show has sparked something in them to question, to start thinking, why can't we do something about this earlier? So even things like that, interactions like that, I think it shows to me that children are very engaged, and they are thinking, they're always curious, and they want to learn more about how things are. And I think it's so important for us as adults, to be encouraging that curiosity in them.
Yeah, totally. That's such a lovely way of approaching it. And I think that maybe even if they can't understand all of the concepts that you talked about in the show, because it's such a visual show and has such a I think it will still have an impact on them. And later on, they might subconsciously remember, oh, I remember this show and this idea about DNA.
Yeah, I think it's very true that a lot of people are visual learners, but I think it's also really true that as many different ways that you can learn and take in information about a subject, the more comprehensive your foundation of understanding will be. So the more resources you have to draw on. If you start to learn about DNA perhaps in a high school biology class and you remember back to a science balloon show, I think that's going to be really helpful for you. And maybe also when we're talking about, I guess, the pipeline, it's going to make you feel like this isn't a new concept, and maybe you're comforted by the fact that you have heard this before, that even one person a long time ago thought you could understand this concept and tried their hardest to, give you an inside peek to DNA. So yeah, I also think it's very important, I guess, the belief that you can learn this, and trying not to make it scary, because I think sometimes in a formal educational setting it can be quite scary, but when it's fun, when it's engaging, when you don't realize you're learning and then all of a sudden it's brought back to you in an educational context like that, that can be quite powerful.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think that's a great point, because I was just thinking about how we might think that certain concepts are too complicated for children to understand. I'm talking about scientific concepts, I guess. But I think in the end, it's up to the person with the knowledge to distill it in a way where it is actually easy to understand for anyone. So, who is it? Is it Richard Feynman who said that you kind of, or is it, maybe it was Albert Einstein? Sorry, I cannot remember now. But I mean, the idea of how, if you cannot explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. So,
absolutely.
So I think it's so important even for us, as science communicators, that we ourselves need to understand the concept and then break it down in a simple way for ourselves, so that then we can, tell that message, share that message with others in a simple manner as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think going back to what you were saying about audience a little earlier too, you also recently gave a TED Talk, which hopefully will be out by the time this episode comes out. I don't know.
So if it is, go watch it.
And in that you used some of your balloon creations. And so I'm wondering if you were using the same, some of the same ones as in your kids' shows, completely different ones.
Yeah, no, completely different. So I had a different message for the TEDx talk. Yeah, so the science show is essentially based on the book, where we're trying to introduce DNA to children, whereas the TEDx talk was more to do about finding your hidden talent and unlocking your potential. So that was my message for, and my key idea that I was trying to share during my TEDx talk was really getting out of your comfort zone. Do something different. try something new, because that's what I did with my balloon business. How I got started with balloons was, in 2019, my church needed a balloon twister for a community event. Now, no one put their hands up. And so I thought, maybe I'll give it a go. Yeah. Now, I've not twisted balloons ever before in my life. And so but then I thought, maybe it won't be that hard. And so, went on YouTube, as you do when you want to learn something new, and made a balloon dog. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. And so, and the rest is history, as you would say. So it's just the idea of, even in science, right? We're always experimenting. We're trying to discover new things as well. And I think the key message here is, don't be afraid of new things. Don't be afraid of failure, and don't be afraid of mistakes. Because, oh my gosh, being a scientist and working in an experimental lab for a long time.
I was going to say you can't be afraid of those things if you're a scientist.
The number of failed experiments. So it's just that mentality of being willing to embrace failure. Yeah, and especially when you work in science, you will encounter failure.
Yes. In science communication too, which is part of STEM. So.
Yeah, in life too. Anywhere, you will face failure at some point in your life.
Yes, yeah. So I thought we could also talk about some other ways of getting kids engaged with science beyond science shows. So I'm thinking there are things like science kits. Even helping parents with things like baking and cooking and learning a bit of chemistry, even gardening. There's lots of rock and crystal collection type stuff, dinosaur fossil digging, not real dinosaur fossils. Doesn't matter. It's teaching
pretend.
Yes. Also some mini solar kits where kids can build like mini solar energy models. And then there's also, I'm sure, lots of TV shows about science designed for kids as well, or they have like a science character in them. And so since, as well as your balloon shows, you've also got an illustrated book about DNA for 4 to 8-year-olds, which you've mentioned earlier. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about this and your motivations for writing it, and also where you see other opportunities for engaging kids with science beyond live shows.
Yeah. So the book was really a project that I didn't expect to get started on. And it all started because they advertised write a children's book in one-day workshop at UC when I was working there as a researcher. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a very interesting concept. So I thought I could join in and see what I can do with that. And so part of the reason why they did that, it was organized by Library for All, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to improve digital literacy for all children, especially those in underdeveloped countries. So as you're probably aware, there are children in countries who don't have access to books. And so what they're trying to do is actually provide that access through actually tablets. So then they have a huge collection of books that they can read from. And they're trying to build the non-fiction section of the book. So they came to UC, got in contact with the researchers, so we can then present our work in a children's book form. And so I wrote a children's book in a day.
Whoa! That's wild.
Yeah, and it's possible. Anything is possible if you put your mind to it. So that was amazing. An amazing experience to learn how you structure a children's book and how you put everything together. And they were happy with the content. So that's how that book came about. Yeah. Wow. And I think, I think books are still really important in conveying that science message to children. I know that we have a lot of options nowadays, science kits, science social influencers perhaps,
Yes.
Yes. And those are kind of like the key ways that we can reach children. And I mean, just yesterday, my son, he actually got a book called Explorations of Science, and he told me, I want to make notes from this book because I want to learn about it.
Wow.
So I'm like, wow. I don't know where this came from, but yeah, great. So this is awesome. And I think, I think we can't underestimate, the traditional methods of reaching out to children. So I think books are still a great way for kids to learn about science. I think science kits are a great tool that parents, or schools or teachers can use. It can be, as a parent, it can be a bit challenging because it does sometimes require your involvement as well.
Yes.
And so my thing is, I think what's important is actually, what you mentioned before about science in the everyday. So how can we engage our children in all the things that we're doing? Because we are surrounded by science all the time. And so how can we then ask questions or maybe get them to ask those questions? How do we pique their curiosity around just everyday things, whatever they're doing every day? So I think that's one thing that we can try and encourage parents, because parents are already quite overwhelmed with everything else with the child. And so how can we make it easier for parents to engage with the children about science? And I think perhaps, providing some resources about how they can be using questions, like even observational questions, just asking questions really, because essentially that's what we're doing in science, isn't it? It's asking questions so that we can find out the answer to something. So if we can encourage that sort of level of curiosity in both the parents and the children, I think it really helps, helps people understand more about their world and be encouraged by how amazing our world is.
Yeah, and I think going back to parents, I think children's exposure to and knowledge that they're being exposed to science all around them in their everyday, whether that's from play kits they might have, or whether they look at the night sky or do baking with their parents, a lot of their knowledge that is STEM engagement will come down to the parents being able to explain that. So I think there's also a little bit of pressure, again, in another area for parents, because that's quite a lot. You're kind of your child's educator until they enter like a formal schooling environment, and then you still continue to educate them in a lot of other ways, but especially in those preschool years, everything they do is filtered through their parents, which means if certain parents maybe aren't as STEM oriented, the child might just not realize that baking is STEM and gardening and is linked to agriculture and a whole bunch of things like that. So yeah, a little bit of pressure again for parents, which I know they don't need.
Yeah, but I think the key thing is also understanding that you don't know everything as well. I don't know everything clearly, but it's more that even if you don't know something, you can go and find out. And I think that's an important thing to instill in children is resourcefulness. So if you have this question, what do you need to do in order to find the answer for it? So it's also developing that life skill, right? Of, taking initiative, being proactive, finding out answers for questions that you have, in your head. All of those things, I think, help with developing that scientific thinking, which I think is important to develop in everyone, really. We need to make sure that, people have that that drive to really look at the evidence, before making an opinion or putting out some thoughts about what you think about a certain topic, but you're looking back at the facts, just so that you know what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, such a critical skill for everything from reading newspapers to trying to understand why the world is the way it is. And I think really, really crucially, like that's skills that people build on their entire life. And if it's better or easier or more supported for people earlier in their life and then throughout, like that's going to be a really great journey. Unfortunately, there's this well-known phenomenon in STEM known as the leaky pipeline, where a lot of people who are part of minorities, including women, gender diverse people, culturally diverse individuals, people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and also intersections of these where intersectionality really compounds that impact. People from, again, those minorities can easily fall out of a curiosity or a STEM pipeline. And that's really unfortunate. And there's a lot of programs that people get involved in to try and make sure that it's an easier journey for others. I know that you experienced this pipeline, and I'd love if you could talk about how this impacted your journey and what it currently means for you to be a cold mentor in STEM.
Yeah, I guess being a woman and also being culturally diverse, there's that intersectionality that comes into play. And for me, I actually felt the gender challenge more than anything, especially when I made the decision to have children. And that's the challenge with, being an early career researcher, that at any point, like if you decide to have children, or you usually have to take time off, maternity leave. And I also made the choice of coming back part-time as well, because for me, what was important for me was to spend time with my children.
Yeah.
And I still needed a career as well. I needed a break. Amidst all of that. But I would say that I probably experienced the motherhood penalty in this case. So where, when I went on leave, my projects weren't deemed as a priority because I wasn't there. And I think a lot of times research projects are like that. It's driven by the person who runs that project. If the person's not there, the project's not going to run. And there was another instance after my second maternity leave with my children. I was before I went on maternity leave, I was supposed to convene a unit on innovation and entrepreneurship, and the arrangement was that the convener will take over that course while I'm on maternity leave, and then when I came back from maternity leave, I was supposed to take up that course again, but I found out that the course wasn't running when I came back. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a bit of a shame. But in a roundabout way, I found out from another lecturer that the course was in fact running. In fact, the guy was lecturing the course. So I was like, oh, okay. So I'm not sure what happened here.
Wow.
And I guess it kind of made me feel like my time in academia was kind of finished, really. I think I sort of had enough of that challenge there. And that's where I started to think of moving to government too. And that was part of the reason why I moved into government. I could have stayed on in academia. I did get an opportunity to stay on and do further research with another researcher. But then I thought, I think it's time for a change. And that's also the beauty of science in a way, in that you're not limited to just academic research. We have people who are doing science in government. We have science communicators like the two of you as well. There's also science in industry. There's a lot of pathways to science that I don't think people realize. But I think that's why it's important for what I do in terms of mentoring and coaching women in STEM, is because sometimes people feel like they are stuck where they are, like they have to be an academic or they have to stay in academia and things like that. But it's not necessarily true. And for me, it's really understanding what is it that's important to you in life. What are your values? What are your strengths? What do you enjoy doing? And how can you do more of it? And so, I didn't grow up with role models or mentors or coaches, in my science career. And I can see such great value if someone had actually been there for me. To give me that advice, or a sounding board in a way, to help me with my career. And so because I don't have that, I felt the need to sort of help other women to really rise up in their career, regardless of what choices they want to make with that. And, it's been very satisfying being a mentor for women in STEM, because I can see that they're making the changes, like they're getting more clarity around what is it that they want to do. And then I think when you're clear about your goals and your dreams, then you know how to set the action steps in order to achieve those dreams. And so, I'm just thinking about the leaky pipeline. It is a tricky problem that we have, but I'm confident, I guess, in the sense that it is recognized as a problem, and that, everyone is trying to do their best to support these women, especially to get them into leadership positions. Because I think that's the challenge here, is that, a lot of women, they go through their early career stages, and then they decided, oh yeah, I don't really want to do leadership. Leadership is not for me, but it's not true. Yeah, I think women actually make really good leaders because we have that caring and nurturing side of us, which is really important, because as a leader, you're actually dealing with people a lot more, and you have to help your people become better. And so I see women as natural leaders in that sense because of our, caring and nurturing quality.
Yeah.
Jinx. Well, just to bring in some, I guess, like numbers and statistics about this, hopefully that this is the bar that it's going to continue to improve from. Right now, only 3% of women are CEOs in STEM businesses, which means 97% of CEOs are men or gender diverse people, but I'm sure the gender diverse population of CEOs is a lot smaller than male CEOs in STEM. We know, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, that women make up just 28% of Australia's STEM workforce, and people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds represent just 20%, and there are, of course, going to be some intersections in there. And we also know from Australian government data from 2018 that people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds are less likely to pursue STEM careers in Australia due to language barriers and a lack of role models, as you said before, Chloe. And overall access to quality STEM education and training opportunities remains unequal. So part of fixing the leaky pipeline, and something that the pipeline metaphor, I guess, refers to, is trying to patch up the leaks every step of the way, from childhood science all the way up to supporting women and culturally and linguistically diverse people, all the way up to CEOs. So every step of the pipeline is places people can fall out, feel unsupported. This includes women who are returning to work after taking parental leave. So there's, I guess, a lot of work to be done, but also being done in these spaces. And I'd love to check in like 5 years and be able to report back that all of these have gone up in statistics. But I think really important to acknowledge where we are now, and that your story and your experiences are felt by a lot of women and culturally and linguistically diverse people across Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got you've mentioned I've got my podcast, Carl Voices in STEM, where I talk to, women in STEM who are culturally diverse and the sort of challenges that they face as well. Not just being a woman, but also being culturally diverse. But I think one thing I wanted to highlight with my podcast was the fact that these are culturally diverse women, but they have actually achieved quite a great amount of success in their STEM career as well. So it is possible. It is possible. Like, I've just released a podcast episode of Dr. Yvette Germani, who is a geophysicist. And she talks about, how we can actually thrive in a male-dominated industry. And the fact that, she is up there being so visible, helping others see that it is actually possible for a woman, a geophysicist, to exist in that space, I think it's an encouragement and in like an inspiring message for those who are interested in that space, in that area as well. So, I think these people are around. I think it's just that they are not visible enough. And I think part of the challenge, and I know that the Australian government has mentioned about how we need to bring up more visibility and representation of women in STEM. And so, this is one way where we can try and amplify their voices, share stories of women scientists, really. Yeah, we don't hear of them enough, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I love about your podcast, is that you're raising up these voices and amplifying these voices so that they can be role models for other women. Like, that is so powerful. And I think something so special about your podcast. So, huge fan. If you haven't already listened to it, go listen to it.
Thank you.
We'll link it.
Yeah, totally. Like, Chloe, what you're doing is really, really important. And I think it's really inspiring for so many women, but also young girls who are even coming to your balloon shows and seeing someone like you, like talking to them about science, and you as a woman in STEM too. So yeah, I think it's amazing.
I'm very blessed to be able to do this, for sure. Yeah. Thank you.
No, of course. It needs to be acknowledged.
And celebrated.
Yes, and celebrated. And I think now it would be fun to think about the future a little bit, and where, Chloe, you would like to see yourself and your business in the future, and what direction you would like to see children's science engagement heading in.
Well, I know one thing in the pipeline is definitely another book.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. I would, now that I've said it out, I have to write it.
Okay, listeners, we're holding
Yeah.
Chloe to this promise.
No, so the plan is to write another science book. Because one of the things I like to do is also create more science shows. So I've got one show now, but I like to expand it so that I can address, different parts of the human body. So we've talked about DNA. I don't know what other ideas I have, but I just want to do something more so that children can understand more about their body and how it works. Yeah, I think sometimes we take for granted how our body works as well, and how we can function the way we function. But having that deeper understanding and awe of your body, I think, gives you hopefully a greater appreciation, and also how you would actually take care of your body too. Yeah, so it kind of links it back to health. Now, the other thing I was thinking of. Yeah, so I've got so we've got the science shows, and what I think is really important is also to not limit where we engage children as well. And so one of the things that I would really like to do is actually to work with corporate companies to see if we can form a partnership or sponsorship so that we can bring these science shows, these science engagement opportunities to children who may not necessarily have the opportunity to participate in shows or workshops like this. So I'm thinking about, how schools can be quite under-resourced, and so how we can then bring it into them, into the schools. And the other thing I was thinking of is also, children in rural and regional areas as well. There's even less opportunities for them to engage with a scientist if there isn't, like maybe a university that's attached to it, because they seem to have less opportunities than those who are living in the city. And I think it's so important that we bring science to everyone, because everyone should be given the opportunity to learn more about science and to learn more about how they fit into this world, really, and how the world works.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more and more initiatives in those spaces as well. I know one of them, and I think you might have even been part of this program, which is the Curious Minds program, which is specifically for rural and regional girls who are like high achievers in STEM but have all of these barriers. And then, they're paired with someone who is a woman in STEM and can like coach them. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I've actually been part of the Curious Minds programs for the last, it might have been 3-4 years actually. Yeah, cool. Yeah. So I mean, it's I think what I find amazing about the girls who join in these programs is that they're really curious about science, and they're so interested in learning and in just getting into science, really. I think that enthusiasm and excitement for science, especially when you see them at a young age, also it makes you feel excited as well, because you feel like, oh my gosh, you've got this whole generation of girls who shouldn't be limited by their gender, but that we can actually help them have a better start and give them that great start at from a young age. So I mean, I'm a huge proponent for the Curious Minds programs, and if you're a scientist, please join the program. A female scientist, join the program so that you can encourage the younger generation. But yeah, so they've got all these programs that are sort of helping stem that leaky pipeline, and I think it's I don't know. I'm just thinking about just giving back to community as well. And I think, the one thing I do like about a lot of scientists have that how do you say, that service aspect to them, really, because, we're curious about the world and want to see how we can make it better. And so that kind of extends to the community as well. And And, if we can try and get more scientists to be part of the community, do more science communication, really.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it feels so disparate because you have a scientist who's working in a lab, but then they actually need to talk about what they do in the lab so that the public understands it a
Yes.
bit better.
Yes.
And I really, really support, how we can bring science to the public, so that then it's not a foreign thing to them. Yeah. And I think it also helps the researcher themselves too, because it brings clarity to what they're doing, why they're doing it. Because sometimes you lose that sense of purpose when you're so down in the trenches that, it might be just all about the science, but it's actually in the end about the people.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people do science, is you're doing science so that everyone can understand the world better, which again is bringing it back to the sciences for everyone and removing the barriers and the purpose of your work.
Yeah. And back to the future of your business. You start on a TV show. Do you think you could start your own TV show? Because I would love that. Like a balloon science TV show. That excites me a lot.
Or web series.
Or web series, yes. Mm.
Oh gosh. So I have been thinking about content creation. I have.
This is so exciting.
Just finding the time for it. And that is part of the where Twistific will be moving towards, is to try and develop more content to begin with on social media and YouTube, as most people do, and to see where we go with that, because I think production can be quite time consuming, and also financially as well.
Yeah.
So I still have so much to learn around production, and also how then I can present it in a way where it's engaging to children and, the parents as well. Because I'm in two minds about it, I have to say, because, on one hand, I can see the value of using social media to share about science. But then I don't want kids to be on social media all the time.
Yeah, it's a hard thing.
So it's a fine balance, I think, and it's
Absolutely.
just something that we have to work on. Because and I think that's probably why there's a bit of a delay on the content creation, because I'm still grappling through that. How can I do this in a way where I feel like, kids are not going to be on social media all the time or on YouTube all the time? Yes.
For us, for Ella and I, time is definitely a big factor. We already struggle to get monthly episodes out for a podcast. So, yeah, I totally understand. And I can't even imagine for someone like you who's like 100 times busier.
Managing 2 businesses, science, regulatory job for the government.
3 kids.
3 kids.
Oh gosh, now outsource. Delegate and outsource. That's my 2 keywords.
Well, I think this is a pretty good place to wrap up the main content of this episode, and I hope that all our listeners have found this journey, these discussions helpful, inspiring, hopefully uplifting for those of you who are women in STEM. I hope you feel less alone, and I hope you've learnt something amazing from Dr. Chloe Lim today. I know Isabel and I have, and we're probably going to be asking Chloe a lot of questions and continuing this chat after the podcast, which is so exciting. So we might turn now to some questions for our audience to keep you thinking as you leave this episode behind.
Yeah, I would love to know, listeners, what creative ways you engaged with science when you were a kid. Was it balloons? Was it science shows or science kits? Something else from pop culture, like a TV show, or something else completely different?
Yeah, let us know. We're super curious. And you can hit us up on our Gmail or let us know on our socials. We are at sci_burst on pretty much everything. And while you're there, why not leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify and wherever you are listening to this groovy podcast on. But finally, to close out this episode, Dr. Chloe Lim, if you could please recommend 3 pieces of media for our listeners, this can be absolutely anything, but just 3 recommendations for them to explore again as they return back to their lives after listening to this podcast.
Yeah, so I'm a big reader, so a lot of my things will be books.
Love it.
So the first book that I would recommend, because we talk about, women in STEM and how we can be helping them climb the leadership ladder in a way, is I've got this book called Show Your Worth by Shalmina Babai Abji. So she's a woman of color who's also an IBM executive.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah, and she shares her stories and tips and practical ways on how a woman of color can actually progress in the STEM career. And I found that book really helpful. And it was a book that I wished I had at the beginning of my career, but I only found it last year. So
better late than never.
Yeah, I know, better late than never. But so I'm sharing it now so that those at the beginning of the career, please pick up this book and read this book. The other, I guess, point of media, I was just thinking about, trying to encourage parents to get involved with the kids to help them with their science. There's a lady called Sarah Habibi, who has Instagram, I think YouTube. She's a social media influencer, but she's also a scientist. So she has a PhD in molecular biology, if I'm not mistaken, and so she went through the academic route. But then now she's ended up being a science communicator.
Amazing.
Yes,
Cool.
I know, and she shares easy to do experiments at home that anyone can just do it with the children as well. So I think her channel is a great one to look for inspiration and ideas on how you can engage your children in science. So the other thing that I would recommend, it's another book, but because of how important storytelling is, I do storytelling all the time with my shows. And what you find is that storytelling is actually quite pervasive in all aspects of life. And it's so important to be able to tell a good story because it actually taps into the emotion. And that actually where you can actually help influence and also help people change their perspective and their thinking. And so, when I was preparing the TEDx talk, I looked up, all the different resources, books that you can learn from about storytelling. And one book that I came across was The Perfect Story. And this is a book by Karen Eber. And she goes into storytelling in different situations. And the other thing I love about her book is that she has checklists.
That's great.
Yes, I know. Yes. And for different situations. And I think it's a great tool for anyone to pick up. Because, if you want to influence someone, I think the best way to do that is actually through stories.
Yeah.
And, we know of storytelling practices from a long, long time ago of how, you sit around a bonfire and then you share a story. And that's how you connect with everyone. So for me, I think that's another great skill to have that anyone should pick up, that anyone could pick up and incorporate in their lives too.
Amazing. So thankful for those recommendations. And when people read them, look them up, I hope they also let us know on our socials and our email. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up the whole episode. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Chloe, for being on our podcast. Stay nerdy, and we will see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you to ANU CPAS for their support and access to their podcast studio.